Hello and welcome. I'm Andrew Denieri, Resident Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Thank you all for joining us here today at the Atlantic Council for our really exciting event called How Can Rare Earths Help Central Asia's Energy Transition, co-hosted with the International Tax and Investment Center. We're thrilled to have the authors of ITIC's new report, Leveraging Central Asia's Rare Earths for Economic Development, with us in studio today here at the Atlantic Council. I'm going to get out of the way in just a second. We'll have a presentation from the authors of the report. We'll do a moderated discussion, and then we'll do some audience Q&A at the end after that. To present the report, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ariel Cohen, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, Dr. Wesley Hill, International Program Manager at the International Tax and Investment Center, and Wilder Alejandro Sanchez, President of Second Floor Strategies. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrew. For most of my presentation, I just would like to thank the Atlantic Council, of which I have the privilege of being a senior non-resident fellow, my friend and colleague Dan Witt, the president of ITIC. I also want to greet Ambassador Ashikbayev, Ambassador of Kazakhstan. It's great to have you here, Your Excellency. The topic of our presentation is the rare earth. The report that we just completed and published could not have occurred without great dedication and work of my two co-authors, Wesley Hill and Alejandro Sanchez. We work on this and other projects on a regular basis, and the two co-authors are doing a terrific job. I also want to thank the staff of the Atlantic Council who put together this terrific presentation. The rare earth may be, and I stress may be, it depends on so many factors. It depends on the United States and the Western government policy. It depends on the private sector investment. It depends for sure on the governments of Central Asia to create the investment climate for development of this resource. But they may be the next big thing in Central Asia as the engine of economic growth. After all, our program is called Energy, Growth, and Security. And the energy part is important because rare earths are a key element, pun intended, of the transition to renewables, the transition to the next generation of high-tech, AI, quantum computing, space travel, you name it. These are lanthanoids on your periodic table for the geeks like me who studied chemistry in school. These are very specialized metals and others. But in our report, we also talk about critical minerals. Critical minerals are not classified as rare earths. And for example, everybody heard about lithium. Lithium goes into batteries. Batteries go into electric vehicles. Lithium is considered a critical mineral. So Central Asia, why Central Asia? Because Central Asia is geographically, geostrategically an important region. It's 5 former Soviet republics that are sandwiched between Russia, China, and Afghanistan and Iran to the south. This is the heart of Eurasia. You probably remember that the theorists of geopolitics talked about the heart of Eurasia. He who controls Eastern Europe controls the heart of Eurasia. He who controls Eurasia controls the world island. He who controls the world island controls the world. Whether it's true or not remains to be seen, but we like that model to explain why in the current competition between Russia, China, the western part of Europe and the United States, that is an area we need to focus on. And in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, you remember, oil and gas became great foci, great centers of investment. There was the pipeline going to the Black Sea, to Novorossiysk. There was the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan from the Caspian, another pipeline. And now Central Asia is the area where we are looking to develop more transportation infrastructure. Russia and China are competing, but they're also competitors between themselves. These are the areas where the West is increasing its involvement. Just last year in New York, President Biden met for the first time for an American president with the presidents of all 5 states. Then they went to Germany. They met with Chancellor Scholz. And they also met with Putin and with Xi Jinping in Xi'an. I hope I pronounce it correctly. So you see that there is this multi-vector policy that Kazakhstan pioneered back in the 90s, and this was a visionary policy that continues until this day. The current president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, was then the foreign minister and prime minister who pioneered that. And I would say that investment is going to be crucial, creating the framework that is business-friendly. Kazakhstan is on the 25th plank in the World Bank Index of Doing Business. Other countries, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, etc., Tajikistan, have mountains, and mountains have these elements and other elements as well. I would stop the big picture here and move on to Alejandro, and then, of course, we'll have the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about this very timely topic. The first thing I want to say is that we're talking about 5 countries, 6 if you include Mongolia, which we also, by the way, address in this report, with their own unique geopolitical realities and different realities regarding rare earth mining. So we need to discuss the specific situation of each country nowadays. For example, Kazakhstan already produces rare earth elements via a state-owned nuclear holding company, Kazatomprom. Also, Astana is very eagerly looking for new partners to invest in rare earth mining and processing. For example, just last year, the Kazakh-German Business Forum took place in Astana. Around 23 cooperation agreements were signed, including an agreement to explore, extract, and process complex rare earths in eastern Kazakhstan. Then you have Uzbekistan, which has created the Center for the Study of Rare Earth Metals at the Al-Malik Mining and Metallurgical Complex, at the only institute of its kind in Central Asia. I would say that these are the 2 countries which have the most forward-looking and progressive policies towards rare earths in Central Asia. Turkmenistan, unfortunately, lacks a transparency, and which is not surprising given its traditional isolationist government. Tajikistan announced around a decade ago a national survey program to prospect for rare earths and critical minerals as well. And but unfortunately, apart from a couple of journal essays and other publications, Dushanbe has not released its final findings. In 2021, during a forum in Moscow, a Tajik official admitted that the country does not have a strong rare earth survey program, as the country's deposits were found by chance. Hence, this is something that we stress a lot in the report, that cooperation between Central Asian countries is necessary. Finally, Kyrgyzstan does have rare earth deposits, and the country's Kutay 2 mining center was operational until around a decade ago. However, the mining has been in a legal limbo over mining licenses. So Kyrgyz authorities have pledged that they're going to reopen the mine, but so far this has not happened. And finally, when it comes to Mongolia, because I don't want to talk too much, well, we think of China being a critical player in Mongolia's mining industry, which is very much true. Mongolia is trying to look to look for new partners, which is again something that we recommend in the report. Just last year, there were high-profile meetings between Mongolian officials with Vice President Kamala Harris and French President Emmanuel Macron that suggests the Mongolian government is looking for different partners for the rare earth deposits. So what we see across Central Asia is plenty of potential. But apart from a couple of countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, things are moving ahead slowly. Hence, I'm going to repeat myself one more time. One of the policy recommendations that, some of the policy recommendations that we mentioned in the report is more cooperation and integration. For example, we talk about creating a Central Asian Center for Rare Earth Studies and Research to inform potential customers, investors, clients, and partners about the rare earth wealth that Central Asia possesses. It remains to be seen how much of a game changer rare earth mining will be for Central Asia. We know that the price for rare earths will grow in the coming years, as we discussed in the report. So there is much profit to be made. Moreover, rare earth will help partially diversify the mining portfolio of more countries across the region, which is always a very welcome development. Thank you.
So my colleagues have already elucidated in a great many ways why rare earth elements are so important, not only for the region, but for the energy transition, emerging technologies, et cetera. But I want to shift our focus to the geopolitical and the international relations components of rare earths. In the same way that we competed and continue to compete for other energy resources, petroleum, most especially crude oil, we will be competing for rare earth elements in the 21st century. And it's already happening. There is already this geopolitical clash we're seeing all over the world for rare earth elements, and it's primarily dominated and it's primarily driven by a geopolitical competition between the United States and China. And this is not a new or emerging trend, actually. Going all the way back to 1993, there was a string of rare earth elements refining businesses that went out of business, mostly in the United States, just because of the trends of the time, globalization. The next year, 1994 to 1995, China identified this as a key geopolitical and geoeconomic strategy that it could advance its not only economic development portfolio on, but it could advance its political influence on. In its 12th and 13th five-year plans, it explicitly set out that involvement in rare earth elements is going to be absolutely vital to feed China's industry. The model that China set up that we are seeing in rare earth elements that first emerged in Burma but is emerging elsewhere is that China is setting up extractive but very closed rare earth element supply chains. To date, rare earth elements and their production is almost wholly monopolized by China. Depending on how you count, between 80 to 90% of rare earth elements refining is controlled by China and done directly inside of China. Concurrent to that strategy, China is engaged in its going out policy that has been Chinese state policy since 1997. The going out strategy just means that it is trying to acquire more mines, more resources to feed this refining industry, this refining complex, so that it maintains a geopolitical and geoeconomic advantage. Well, what does it want to do with this? Well, what it mostly hopes to do with this is that it can use this advantage to control the tenor of international relations. It can control the emerging energy and economic architectures that will define everything with the future of energy and much of the future of geopolitics. So, what does this mean for Central Asia? Well, even though China is involved in Central Asia, of course it has to be, it's right next door, China has not succeeded in setting up the closed extractive supply chains that it has set up in, say, Burma or Laos, or is trying to set up with varying degrees of success in, say, various Latin American countries. So this means that Central Asia is very much at a crossroads. Central Asia has the opportunity to expand its rare earth elements production without being wholly dependent on China, because this is ultimately China's objective. It makes no secret about it, and its policies in the past have openly pursued a very closed system. As of 3 weeks ago, so after the publication of this report, Beijing cut off all exports of rare earth element refining technologies to the United States and is heavily restricting its refining exports to abroad. China has already entered into conflicts over other rare earth element and critical refining export technologies and policies with other countries, such as Namibia, Madagascar, and Tanzania. Central Asia right now is not beholden to China. It is in a position where it can develop its rare earth element refining capacities, both for its, its national development strategies, but also for breaking this Chinese monopoly. But this is only going to happen with good policy, both from the American side and the Central Asian side, a lot of cooperation on the investment side, the creation of best practices, norms, et cetera, that we all spell out in the report. But my time is unfortunately expiring, so I'll be more than happy to ask, or more than happy, along with my colleagues, to answer any of these questions in the Q&A. And thank you again to the Atlantic Council for having us and for your time. Thank you.
Gentlemen, well done. Congratulations on the report again, and thank you for sharing it with us here today at the Atlantic Council. I want to introduce the rest of our panel because we have, as you can see, quite a full panel of very distinguished experts on rare earths and on Central Asia. I want to start on screen. We have joining us Mr. Yerlan Galiev, the chair of the National Geologic Survey of Kazakhstan. To my left here, we have Saria Evans-Pritchard Jayanti, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and my boss, Ambassador John Herbst, senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. I think the first thing I want to say to our panelists is thank you. We have lots to get through, so I'll encourage, as we go through the moderated portion of this discussion, we want to encourage concise comments here so we can get through all the substance we want to and have time for audience Q&A at the end. For the audience here at the Atlantic Council and joining us online on Zoom, you can ask your questions on askac.org. I have my handy iPad here, and I'll read out your questions in the final portion of the event. Work for everyone? All right, Ambassador Herbst, you and I have read this report multiple times and I think find ourselves referring back to it. What stands out the most to you about this report?
Look, I think that the report and the presentation we've had today describes the reason for much stronger American and Western engagement in Central Asia. It is a critical region, and that's been true since the emergence of Central Asia as independent countries. But the report talks about the requirements of the new economy, of the transition economy, and it points out very clearly that Central Asia is rich in rare earth minerals. So this is simply another reason for enhanced engagement by the West. We heard about the geopolitical reasons for this, and I think those reasons are correct. I'm not certain that the Central Asians understand it quite the same way, which is normal. But I do know that the countries of Central Asia want a closer relationship with the United States, and that is one important part of their maintaining their hard-won independence. And increased U.S. engagement in Central Asia has one more reason, which is rare earths. I don't think that the Central Asians are looking for a fight with either China or Russia, but they are looking for a closer relationship with the United States. And our interest in strengthening that region and our interest in making sure we have access to the minerals we need for the economy of the future says we should get off the stick and push very hard for this.
Ambassador Herbst, I know you have to go in just a minute here. If I can quickly follow up, if you're a U.S. diplomat creating, the U.S. strategy in Central Asia, what is the role of critical earths in here? How would you add a rare earth strategy into that broader regional strategy?
Look, it's very simple. China is our principal adversary. They are not a friend of the United States. And it's remarkable, but not at all surprising, as mentioned, that they've cut off the export of certain technologies in this area to the United States, even as they complain about us limiting their ability to steal our technology and our information, our very sensitive information, which demonstrates, again, this is a competition. And we have allowed the Chinese to steal a march for 25 years in the area of rare earths. And so we need to fix that. And we are able to do it. We have an ability to innovate that far exceeds theirs. Their innovation is based largely on taking our technology So we have an advance here, and we should take advantage of that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being with us. I know you have to go. I want to turn now to Mr. Galiev on screen. Mr. Galiev is in Kazakhstan and can, I think, speak to the regional position here. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities to meet the growing demand for rare earths in Kazakhstan? And Mr. Galiev has a presentation as well that he's going to share.
Yes. Hello, thank you for having me. The first slide, please. This slide is especially for the chemistry geeks, as Mr. Cohen. So this is a periodic table of elements. Yes, this one. And as was mentioned, the lanthanoids are the elements that we're talking about today, the rare earth metals. So from this periodic table, every element here can be found in Kazakhstan. So it's under our feet. But from those which are currently produced, from the 30 of them which are identified by U.S. Geological Survey as the critical for U.S., 19 are currently being produced in Kazakhstan. Next slide, please. Here you can see some of those elements and some of those minerals. And just to name a few, for instance, the natural graphite that I know is very important for U.S. industry because it's used in turbines. It's used in some alloys for the very high heat. And so for those natural graphite, there are 3 fields that are already explored and they have the reserves. And from those 3 fields, 1 is currently contracted and 2 are reserved. So there's no one working there. Next slide, please. Those are companies, so there are more than 100 companies currently producing those 30 elements, 30 metals, 30 minerals that are called critical for US. And I won't mention them, not call them, but there's lots of them working in Kazakhstan. Next slide, please. And also the state is currently doing some prospecting works. So in 3 years, starting from 2022 to 2024, we plan to do prospecting works on 12 objects. And just to name a few, for instance, the Mirolubovsky object in eastern Kazakhstan, I have information that there's already some information about dikes there, and those dikes have the concentration, like the enrichment, more than 1.8 thousand grams per ton. So it's not 1.8 grams, it's 1.8 thousand grams per ton. And that's mostly lithium, rubidium, cesium, so both critical and both rare earth metals. Next slide, please. If I will continue about the state prospecting works, there are some scientific works also currently being researched in Kazakhstan. And I wanted to mention the geodynamic and metallogenic analysis of the southern Kazakhstan. I think that actually southern Kazakhstan could be the most potentially interesting for the rare earths. And as was mentioned by Mr. Cohen, that one of the big, by Alejandro, that the Kazatomprom, which is the biggest uranium producing company in Kazakhstan, they're also working with rare earths. And most of the deposits are in southern Kazakhstan. So next slide, please. Continuing about the prospecting by the state about lithium. Lithium is a key aspect for the green energy transition. And so I just wanted to mention three interesting projects. One in eastern Kazakhstan, Kalbanurim or zone. One in southern Kazakhstan, Bayankovskaya Square, and the Aral Sedimentary Basin. So as you know, Aral Sea is a big natural disaster. It's a very tragical story. But as it's a tragedy, but at the same time, it can be an opportunity because it's a very vast salar, so brine territory. So if we can establish the production of the lithium brine there, it could be a very interesting prospecting region. Next slide, please. Those are currently, so it's not being produced, lithium is not being produced in Kazakhstan, but there are some reserves in the eastern Kazakhstan that are already on the state balance sheet. It's just a table from those. Next slide, please. This is the state subsoil fund program. So basically, what you see on this map in the gray color is 72%, which is open for the licensing for the exploration. You can pick any license area, any license block on this map, and then you can apply for the license, and you can do it on the principle of first come, first serve. Next slide, please. So we plan to, so we're currently building this digital platform for subsoil use. And there are several principles, and I just wanted to mention that you can apply for the license online, and you can have access for the geological information. You can download reports, etc., and you can do it online. Next slide, please. And just to short information about the National Geological Survey, UGQ, our main mission is to be like a stable and a safe provider of geological information and to create a favorable climate for investments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Galiev. Surya, I want to bring you in here, in part because you've actually have experience doing energy development projects, including in Central Asia. What's your take on rare earths development? Where are the opportunities in the region?
I think, to Ambassador Herbst's point, there are differences of opinion and priorities, whether you're looking at this from the perspective of the United States or whether you are looking at it from the perspective of the Central Asian countries. But there is a lot of overlap. Mm-hmm. So I think as to the latter, the countries themselves are looking primarily for investment. It is a development opportunity. It's something that has become extremely important, particularly with the geostrategic energy realignment after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also, of course, because of the energy transition and lithium and other rare earth elements that are necessary for different parts of that transition. So that's primarily an economic incentive, but it's also true that when nobody's listening too carefully, that the governments of a lot of the Central Asian countries will admit that they would like to be a little bit less oriented towards China or a little bit less reliant on Russia. And so I think it's also a geostrategic realignment opportunity for the governments of those countries. But that is not necessarily something they want to play up because, of course, they are in a dangerous neighborhood. From the perspective of the United States, everything is an opportunity. Any avenue through which we could increase our rapport with those governments, through which we could support the development of any industry, but especially industries that also realign, or rather align with our own national priorities, including the energy transition, is super helpful. The State Department is working on some of this, the Energy Bureau in particular, and they have the Mineral Strategic Partnership Initiative, which is a program that sets up partnerships with the governments of these countries in an effort to catalyze and leverage foreign direct investment, but also just private investment in private companies generally. The Department of Commerce, funded by the Department of State, is doing technical assistance work in a number of these countries and is looking to get programs off the ground in the rest of them as well, if they'll have us, specifically to help the development of rare earth minerals sector, but mining more generally in a sustainable way. And I think any inroads that the US government and other Western governments can make will help secure, one, those partnerships and those relationships, but also critical minerals supply chains going forward, which are critical.
Right. Thank you. I want to remind our audience here, we'll be having the last kind of 10 minutes of this event will be audience Q&A. To submit your question, this goes for our in-person audience here and those joining on Zoom. Enter your question on askac.org. Again, askac.org. So, Ariel, I want to come back to you. We've talked a lot about China today, and with good reason. But you and I were talking earlier that Russia is the other big part of, if we're talking about critical minerals in Kazakhstan and Central Asia more broadly, they are a factor. Give us your take on how Russia fits into this picture.
First of all, Russia by itself has, as they say, the periodic table, or what the Russians would call a Mendeleev table of all the elements. They have all the rare earth they can. They used to be a huge producer back in the 60s and the 70s. I did some early work on the strategic supply in early 80s for US government. And Russians and countries of Southern Africa used to be a big producer, not China at that time. So these things shift. So if Russia played a win-win game, they could have been a producer. In terms of Kazakhstan, it's a very fraught relationship. Let's not forget the Soviet regime. Let me back it. the Tsarist regime engaged in colonization of Kazakhstan for centuries, followed by the Soviet regime that not only created a vast network of concentration camps, of gulags, in Kazakhstan, but also the communist regime was the reason for mass starvation, in the result of which 1/3 of the population of Kazakhstan died. So the trauma, the multi-generational trauma is there. The Kazakhs are treading very carefully, but they cannot ignore the rhetoric that comes from some leaders in Moscow, and at the same time, President Putin comes and tries to sell them a nuclear reactor. So there's a lot of engagement. The pipeline, the KTK, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium pipeline, goes through Russian territory to a Russian port. So that cannot be ignored either, right? However, the Kazakhs, I think, know, and the president, who is a consummate diplomat, President Tokayev, know how to play this game in such a way that both China and the West remain partners. And that is the paramount concern there, that we, the West, US and Europe, remain partners. As Soraya mentioned, we need to engage more. My suggestion would be we need to bring our policy deliberations to a close and both have the Development Finance Corporation, the Millennium, whatever it's called, Millennium Challenge Corporation, basically USAID, and our representatives in the international financial institutions, primarily the World Bank and IFC, financing feasibility studies, financing technological studies, and yes, financing mining, because this mining is vital to energy transition. And I would add financing nuclear programs and natural gas, and including LNG. I know there's a huge debate going on in the Biden administration, and the extremists are saying we should stop LNG. That is suicidal. Those who are opposing nuclear development do not understand or do not want to understand that nuclear energy is zero-emission energy. So with that in mind, we need these rare earths. We need also to have a dialogue with our European partners to be on the same page with Europe, because the Europeans, frankly, are very interested in doing their own thing on their own. Macron went to Central Asia, to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Scholz hosted Central Asian heads of government, as I mentioned. So I think we need to do more and better.
More and better.
Hear,
That's
hear.
the tagline from this event, I think. Alejandro, I want to go to you because we talk about great power competition, U.S., Russia, China, but as we've talked about, the demand for rare earths is going to explode in the next coming years and decades, including in competition among countries that are rich in rare earths to get the investment to get those rare earths out. What can the Central Asian countries do to be more competitive as this race heats up?
I think it's a great question and very timely. So just this week I published an article for a website, and it was about Bolivia. What happened, and I'm actually originally from Peru, so I know very well what my neighbors are doing. The Minister of Mining of Bolivia, earlier this year, just in the first week of January, gave a presentation about the results of a national surveying program across all of Bolivia for rare earth minerals, for rare earth elements. And he said that samples have been found in Cochabamba, Santa Cruz, and several other departments. Last year, President Luis Arce of Bolivia went to Brussels for a summit with the European Union, and he openly said, I'm going to look for investments for rare earths, to bring European investment to Bolivia for rare earths. One example. Another example, I'm going to go through them very quickly. Another example would be Africa. The Lobitos railway corridor is being upgraded right now, I believe with some US funding. That will help rare earths from Angola, the DRC, and Zambia go to the Atlantic ports and from there to the international market. Now, one final example is seabed mining for rare earths. it's not just China that's doing it. I believe Norway is doing it as well. They have had a long debate about it that I think, and the government also has agreed that they're going to go ahead with it. Japan is also very interested in seabed mining. So countries that have rare earth deposits are surveying and upgrading their infrastructure to export the rare earth deposits to countries that want them, and countries that have rare earth deposits, that want rare earth deposits like Norway, Japan, so others, are looking for reliable suppliers, and even within their own territories. So that's why I said that Central Asia is doing something, but it's not doing enough. Certainly Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan are leading the pack, but other countries in the region are lagging behind. And what we do in the report is provide several recommendations, post-recommendations, more integration, creating a rare earth bank in the same way that there is a uranium bank in Kazakhstan. We also recommend creating a rare earth research center so that all these countries, including Mongolia, can provide information that can be given to the international community, to prospective clients, customers, investors, so they know exactly where the rare earth deposits. And one final example, because I don't want to talk too long, is transportation. It's not just about finding the rare earths and mining them. You also have to get them to the international market, to the customer. And you have, because, like as Ariel said very correctly, Central Asia is a landlocked region. There aren't really many options. You can either use the Belt and Road, go through China, go through Russia. But what we recommend is the middle corridor, the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, which is, by the way, headquartered in Astana. We think that Central Asian countries should team up with Kazakhstan and invest more in the middle corridor, so that when surveying ends, when mining begins, the rare earths can actually be taken out of Central Asia to their customers using the middle corridor.
Thank you very much. I want to follow up on both the middle corridor and those investment decisions in just a second here, but 30 seconds from Ariel.
Yeah, I was in Kazakhstan in June for a major international economy and investment Congress. And I had a lot of conversations, including about rare earth. And I had a feeling, two things real quick. One is Kazakhstan, as other countries in the region, are trying to be very private about the geological data that they have. They don't like to share. I understand that Russia, for example, classified some of its oil data. The Chinese data and statistics are notoriously non-transparent. I understand all that. However, what Alejandro said is extremely important. Central Asian countries are not alone. They're not operating in the vacuum in terms of attraction of investment. There is a competition. And the African countries, Latin American countries, and others will compete increasingly. And actually, ladies and gentlemen, from my multi-year work in oil and gas, I can tell you, even if oil and gas project is more expensive in Canada or in North Sea, money will go there. Why? Because it's more safe and secure legally. There's less risk of expropriation, and ditto with the rare earth. If it's Canada, if it's Mexico, if it's, I don't know, Australia, the money will go there before they go to Central Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask the other side of this question, if I can, to Saria. Put on your Western executive hat here, right? You're weighing investment decisions in Central Asia, maybe it's in Southern Africa, on mining rare earths. What sorts of things would you need to see from a government or a policy environment in Central Asia to make a positive decision there?
This is going to be a fairly generic answer because it's the same that is true in every developing economy, which is market certainty, rule of law, and a belief that you're not going to, for example, face unfair competition from state-owned enterprises. In Central Asia in particular, as Ariel mentioned, there's also a transport aspect. And they really do need to sort out how they're going to move the minerals and how they're going to get them to Western markets. There's also a question of where they will be refined and processed. Are, for example, electric vehicle battery factories going to be located in Uzbekistan or in Kazakhstan, or is it going to outsource that to other countries? That's an amazing commercial opportunity for the companies that are going to be at the front line of that. But at the same time, they are working in markets where these things, in most cases, haven't been done yet. Yeah. And the legal and regulatory regime needs to be adequately developed to provide sufficient commercial certainty to those companies. There is work underway, including State Department-funded, Department of Commerce assistance programs, but there is also private sector work. The World Bank, EBRD, other NGOs and IFIs are also at play. And I think the faster it can all move, the better it will be for everybody.
I want to quickly nail down on that transport aspect and go to you, Wes, with this first. We talked about the middle corridor just now. How do we leverage this demand for rare earths into making further progress on the middle corridor?
Well, the middle corridor, and I'll just say a little bit for the sake of the audience, is a transportation route across the Caspian Sea via Azerbaijan and the Caucasus to the wider markets from Central Asia that hopes to dodge unfriendly neighbors, essentially. And for a long time, it was something that was basically on the back burner. There was a lot of procrastination, the can was kicked down the road, and then very suddenly the attitudes changed after Putin invaded Ukraine again. So with that in mind, I think that rare earth elements are just another thing that factor into this changing economic calculus in Central Asia. So the first thing to note is that the middle corridor isn't a flight of fancy. It already exists. There is stuff going through the middle corridor right now as we speak, but there is a logistical bottleneck. And that logistical bottleneck is getting things across the Caspian Sea itself and then through the rest of the Caucasus. When there is more investment in solving this logistical bottleneck, either through, depending on the commodity, more shipping, an underseas pipeline, et cetera, then we will see the middle corridor pretty naturally expand and explode. But there needs to be a sort of deluge of upfront investment in fairly expensive infrastructure that won't have an immediate short-term gain for the middle corridor to come online. But something I want to add, related both to the middle corridor and Surya's previous answer, is value supply chains. So Kazakhstan especially, but all the Central Asian countries with rare earth elements have a chance to move up the value supply chain and not just export rare earth elements as a commodity. So to physically describe rare earth elements really quickly, rare earth elements are not extremely dense. They are densely located in a specific region, but if you take a chunk of metal or a chunk of soil out of the earth, the density of most rare earth elements will be lower than, say, raw iron or unprocessed iron or coal, copper, et cetera. So because of this, it makes transportation costs of raw ore more difficult. Higher because you're moving less product relative to waste. But this is actually a good news for Central Asian countries because it makes it easier to move up the supply chain. So if, for example, the earlier question about, well, can we make lithium batteries in Central Asia? Absolutely. The transportation costs of getting it out will be much higher, so there's all that more reason to engage in some domestic manufacturing. And it doesn't have to be the entire finished product. It can just be refining. It could be some, partial prefabrication, et cetera. So those two things together, the upfront investment and then also moving up the supply chain, I think will very naturally expand the middle corridor. And in doing so, it would help Central Asia tremendously. It would, be less reliant on Russia or China, less worried about Iran and Afghanistan, and more interconnected with the West.
Thank you. Mr. Galiev, you get the final word on the middle corridor before we move into audience Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. So I will be very short. Recently in 2024, in January, so the first block train from China arrived into Azerbaijan in 11 days. Was carrying electric vehicles, some consumer goods, some pipelines, and some other products. So it took it only 11 days. Maybe it sounds too much for you, but for our growing, we are still working with some infrastructure issues, with some building capacity for our specialists. So I think that it's already a good sign that Kazakhstani government is paying a very high attention into the Trans-Caspian corridor, and we are working with our partners, with international partners, to make this corridor as stable as possible. Of course, it will be the key part for the rare earths industry. We understand that for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, to our audience, if you have a question, askac.org is the place to go. They'll pop up on my iPad here, and I'll pitch them to panelists for the last 10 minutes here. I'm going to start with a question from Jeff Bell at the National Endowment for Democracy, who writes, how can U.S. or Western investors compete with Chinese bids to invest in rare earths? Chinese companies often aren't bound by the same transparency, accountability, and environmental requirements that bind Western investors, sometimes making them an attractive investor to Central Asian leaders. What can the U.S. do to make their bids more attractive while still maintaining these important standards? Who wants to take that on first?
Can I start?
Yeah, sure.
I think we're close to a tipping point, at least in Western countries, on sustainability and on what is often just called ESG. I think we're reaching a point where there are enough Western companies that are not willing to do business with unenvironmental extraction industry entities that the difference in competitiveness between, for example, a Chinese company that doesn't care and a Canadian or American company that does care is shrinking. And it doesn't mean that the absolute price is going to not favor the Chinese companies that don't care, but I do think that the market in which being sustainable is an advantage is growing, and that we're close to that tipping point.
Anyone else like to add?
I think Wesley.
Yeah, go for it.
So the absolute biggest thing that Western companies have over Chinese companies in this regard is that it does not tie into a closed system. So if let's say a random mine somewhere in Central Asia wants to work with Chinese suppliers, there are very often stipulations in the contract that say, and we will reserve the output of this mine and it will not be refined in this country. There are explicit trends that reinforce economic dependency. And for an individual enterprise, this may be acceptable, but if you take it in aggregate, this contributes to things like middle income traps, and it prohibits the long-term development of moving up the supply chain. It makes macroeconomic development in general in the region much more difficult. So I think that Kazakhstan, and actually all over the world, the sort of honeymoon phase of Chinese investment is over, because people are increasingly understanding that, well, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. There are many cases, I don't think I have to enumerate too many on them, of companies or countries regretting their investment with China. And of course there are contract disputes, or there might be things going on with the West, but it's a very predictable set of behaviors. The United States doesn't sign a deal with some country and then take its port if there is a disagreement. There isn't the idea that something will be wholly expropriated, or that the United States will restrict market access inside that country with other third parties. So it is true that if you look at the price tags and you look at nothing else, a company may look at China and say, well, this is way cheaper, and they'll even bring their own labor force often. But there are so many things that cannot easily be quantified, that fall more into the realm of economic externalities that people are more and more aware of, that I think are going to give Western companies an increasingly higher edge in the...
Alejandro, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, very quickly.
Very quickly.
Two quick issues. One is that I believe that many Central Asian countries really want to diversify their partners when it comes to mining and investment. Just in 2023, we had several high-profile meetings at the presidential level. You had the C5+1 in New York. You had the summit, the meeting in Germany. You had visits by President Macron, like I said, to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia. You had a summit between the Central Asian countries and the Arab countries as well. So this shows that Central Asian countries' governments are looking for new partners. And looking to the future, and when we talk about U.S. investment in Central Asia, the one event to look out for will take place, I believe it's in April, in Almaty, Kazakhstan, which is when the first ever Business 5+1 summit is a conference roundtable summit is going to take place. This is the first event of its kind in which it's an attempt by Central Asian countries to bring more investment from the United States. How successful it's going to be, well, it remains to be seen. But it's an example again that Central Asian companies and governments really want to attract more U.S. investment away from the traditional, the usual suspects of like mining and energy to other issues.
Mm-hmm. Ariel, quickly, and then to Mr. Galiev.
Don't forget, we're still having the governments and the state-owned enterprises making these decisions. And the overall multi-vector policy that I mentioned and Alejandro alluded to suggests or dictates that the choice of partners is not going to be only China or only Russia. Therefore, we need to engage in more active dialogue, as Soraya mentioned before, including on rare earth. But at the same time, we need to have the investment backup, be it insurance or pools of money available from the government on commercial terms, but from the government as the vote of our full confidence in this project. That's point number one. Point number two, from strategic communications point of view, when you really pay attention to Chinese advantage and our disadvantage of having, for example, something like Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Yeah, it's probably you're dead in Washington if you're suggesting to abolish Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but we need to shine more light on Chinese unsavory practices. And then, presumably, the governments in the region will think twice before going with those companies and also highlight the predatory practices that Chinese enterprises are engaged in terms of environmental damage and such in places like Africa. So there is a dimension of finance, there's dimension of the diplomacy, but there is also of dimension of shame, blame, and engage in strategic communications.
We have a few questions here on regulation of the mining sector in Central Asia. And so, Mr. Galiev, I wonder if I can pitch this one to you. It talks about Kazakhstan and says, there was a major mining accident recently this past October. What is Kazakhstan doing to support safety and appropriate regulation in the mining industry as investments in rare earths hopefully increase?
So yes, there was an accident very recently in one of the mines, and so we have several big producers working in Kazakhstan, and I know that they're facing lots of scrutiny because of those accidents. And I think that government nowadays and the president and the parliament and everyone are working right now to have a dialogue with those companies, because there is a big public unrest because of those accidents. So I think that what we can do is the mining code itself is based on the international practices, on the mining code of Western Australia and of Canada. So what we can do is just to continue working on the legislation and working with the companies, with the business, to meet the high demands of the safety on the mining objects. And of course, we will be working on them together with international organizations.
Thanks very much. I actually have one more kind of technical question here for you, Mr. Galiev, that comes from Dan Bice at 4IR Microgrid, who asks, the US DOE has had dramatic results extracting rare earths from coal, including one US mine that's now worth over $2 billion. Has Kazakhstan looked at extracting rare earths from some of its coal reserves?
So I don't think that we have, but I think that one of those panelists, they mentioned that there was an interesting conference in Riyadh, and I had a discussion with my colleague from India, and India is nowadays working on those rare earth extraction from coal. So I need to look into those geochemical analysis of our coal, and I think that we can really work on those possibilities. So if the person who is writing this question, if he has some experience and he wants to share this experience with us, we'll be very open and very ready for the discussion.
Excellent. Glad we can end on that note. Thank you very much to our panelists, to Yerlan, to Ariel, Wesley, Alejandro, Saria, and Ambassador Herbst, who just had to leave earlier this morning. Thank you all to you, our audience in the studio and watching online. We here at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center are aiming to do even more on rare earths and on Central Asia as well. So do stay tuned, and thank you again for watching.